Hello everyone, my name is Anurag Shinde and I am an independent researcher. Today I am speaking with Dr. Kurush Dalal for the Mumbai Archives project of the Geo Institute Digital Library. Dr. Kurush Dalal has had a BA from the University of Mumbai, an MA in archaeology and a PhD in the early Iron Age of Rajasthan, both from Deccan College, Pune University. Subsequently, he shifted his focus on the early medieval period, predominantly on the west coast of India, and excavated the sites of Sanjan, Mandad and Chandore, during which I had the good fortune to work with him. Dr. Dalal also actively works on memorial stones and Asker's stones in India and dabbles in numismatics, defense archaeology, architecture, ethnoarchaeology and allied disciplines. He has published over 35 papers and has read many more at the national and international seminars. He runs a small catering business inherited from his mother, the legendary late K.T. Dalal. He has blended his passion for food and archaeology into a research in culinary anthropology and food archaeology. Thank you, Dr. Dalal, for speaking with us.
It's an absolute pleasure to be here, and it's so good to have you here interviewing me, Anurag.
Likewise, sir. Thank you. So to begin with, you grew up in the Bombay back when the city was much more idyllic compared to today. So could you tell us a bit more about your nostalgic connections with that past of this city? And are there any stories about your own personal history, like the ancestor Ardashir Wadia and his contributions to the city?
So, Anurag, I grew up in Bombay, and then I lived in Mumbai for many years. And I love to see the way the city has changed around us. Bombay was a much slower, sleepier, quieter city. I mean, it might have been urbs primus in India, but it was still much quieter than Mumbai is today. So the Bombay that I grew up in was a Bombay of smells, sounds, visuals. It was very different. I mean, today almost everybody lives in, glass enclosed AC buildings and things like that. You can't hear the city around you. And what I really loved was the audioscape of the city. You would have various people selling things. In the evenings, you'd have these amazing blind singers who traveled Bombay streets, and they would be led by a one-eyed man, and they'd have their hands on each other's shoulders, and they would stop under each building and sing this line which went Allah hi dega sammati dega, till somebody came to the balcony, and then you would request a song and they would sing in the most beautiful voices, and people would wrap money in white paper so that it could be seen and throw it down. And I'm talking about 10 paise, 5 paise, which don't even exist today.
Right.
And so things like this were very, very much part of the city. I still remember there was this amazing guy who used to come around during the whooping cough time. And he would be selling donkey's milk, Jenny's milk.
Gadhi ka doodh.
Gadari nu doodh. And I remember I had a bad cough, and my grandfather had stopped the Gadari nu doodh man and sent me down with him. He'd taken his own glass. He didn't trust the glass, and also took a bottle of water to wash the poor Khadari's udders. And once you would go, there would be a course. So that fellow would keep coming every day for whatever 10, 15 days and things like that. I still remember the taste. It was very sweet. It was oddly very sweet and warm, and didn't have much other flavor to it. And you would get like this much. I mean, there's only that much you can get out of a poor donkey in any case. And the donkey would have bells and beads on her neck, and be a very well taken care of donkey compared to donkeys that you see littering the streets of North Bombay. So things like this, things about, anybody coming to your door and ringing your doorbell, people asking for water, people asking for addresses. Today you'd probably hold somebody at gunpoint if they rang your doorbell. But it was a very casual Bombay. Very often the main doors would be open. My grandparents lived in Bandra. All my vacations were spent there. Bandra was a village.
Yes.
I mean, I tell my students and others that my great-grandmother was a poor widow. So all she could find to rent was a house in Bandra. And I mean, when you talk about that today, where, a lakh of rupees will not get you a flat on rent in Bandra for a month. That's the pace at which the city has changed. So it was a lovely city. It was great growing up and seeing the transformations. But to be very honest, I don't recognize the south of Bombay any longer. Yeah. My grandfather had a car, which was a big thing in those days. It was always a beat up second hand old British car, but he had a car. And he would grumble if he did not get parking under his building on the footpath in the evening. Under the building. Huh? He would grumble if he had to park across the road. And I realized that when I left Bombay about 18, 19 years back, and moved to Navi Mumbai, very often I would be calling up my brother. Luckily, mobile phones were there by then, and saying, "Come and pick me up because the car is parked 1.5 kilometers away from home." And I'm talking about 9 in the night. So, my grandfather would have probably flipped his lid if he'd been alive. So, that kind of thing. And again, Bombay grew too fast for itself in many ways. And that's also how a city grows sometimes. There are spurts of growth. And then the last thing I'd like to say about the Bombay I grew up in was, it was an incredibly cosmopolitan Bombay.
At present, there are many metropolises in India, 21st century India. But according to you, what makes Mumbai's history stand out when compared to other cities of India?
So Mumbai is a very, very interesting place. And I say Mumbai, not Bombay, because Bombay was a much smaller part of Mumbai. To be very honest, Bombay was the so-called 7 islands, which were then put together. So it's really Colaba to Mahim, which was Bombay. My grandfather would regularly, once a month come down to VT and the GPO for work. And he would say, tomorrow I'm going to Mumbai. Because it was going to Bombay the next day. And Bandra and Bombay used to actually be separate municipalities at one time. So the Mumbai of that earlier period saw beautiful developments take place. I mean, right from a prehistoric past, which probably goes back at least 1 lakh or 2 lakh thousand years or more. I have had the misfortune to always say 30,000-40,000 years. I have recently been slapped in the face by an old article where I looked at stone tools and realized they were lower Paleolithic from Kandivli. So that actually puts things in a different perspective today. So it was a continuous influx of people who came from outside. The autochthonous peoples of Mumbai, a lot of people might not like what I'm saying, were not the Marathas as such. They were the Agris, the Kolis, the Bhandaris, the Mais, the Chaukrashis, Panchkarshis. These were the original people of Bombay. The immigrants to Mumbai were the Pathare Prabhus, the Parsis, the Portuguese, and then a large, as I would like to call them, variety of flavors of Muslims. And there were Muslims from all over India, from the Konkan coast and from the hinterland who came in, from Gujarat who came in, the Boris came in, and Khojas came in. And each of these communities actually improved the flavor of Bombay. So it was, like a garam masala. Every time something new was added, it just kept enhancing the flavors. And they all lived like a very well-oiled machinery. So whether it was under the Portuguese or before that under the Shilaharas or after that under the British, Mumbai had a separate life from being part of the empire. And it existed in a microcosm of its own creation, and it got along beautifully well with each other. So yeah, there would be once in a while some chillam chilli. There was actually a Parsi riot, which was caused because the dog riots of Bombay. So yeah, the word riot.
The honor of causing the first riot in the city.
Yes, the Parsis caused the first riot in the city. But the joke is that when we call it a riot today, it was more chillam chilli than anything else. And Bombay had very little entertainment. So one of the great entertainments of Mumbai, and I mean this is something that actually brought a lot of Mumbaikars together, was to go to Phansi Talao and go to the famous hanging tree of Bombay and watch people being hung. So there would be long announcements. So can you imagine a life like that where you would look forward to go to a good hanging? And in gory detail, you would be told the details of each person's crimes before they were hung by the neck till dead. And there would be all kinds of chana singwala and bangle sellers and flower sellers, and it would be a full mela. It would be announced on the streets for weeks before, so that everybody took time off, people dressed up in their best to come and watch a hanging. So the humor of the city is very interesting. The fact that the city could laugh at itself, the fact that the city was made up of hardworking businessmen, merchants, and This makes a difference, Anurag, which is not a city of Babus originally. It's a city of merchants, entrepreneurs, and disruption is not good for business, at least not at home. Disruption elsewhere might be good for business, but disruption at home is not good for business. So everybody very amicably got along. And yes, there might have been little tension now and then, but that was all part of the deal. The oldest newspaper in India and in Asia is a newspaper in Bombay. That kind of thing. Even the freedom struggle, there were some bits that were very solid, especially the press, etc. But on the ground, there wasn't really that much of a groundswell as much as we'd like to believe, because people again were very busy with their lives. And swapping one government for another government was actually at par for Mumbai. Mumbai had been through so many governments that it was, well, one more government to come. Not a nice thing to say maybe, but yeah, it's true.
And so, are there any stories of communities or in general some aspects of the city's history that have been forgotten, and which do you think is there's like a big gap in the collective narrative of this city?
Oof. There are so many, Anurag, so many stories.
One that you'd specifically like to highlight?
So I'd love to talk about the Pathare Prabhus, The Pathare Prabhus are one of the most interesting groups of people and communities who live in Mumbai. They consider themselves to be Brahmins or Kshatriyas, depending on who you're speaking to. The Brahmins and Kshatriyas look down their noses at them. Their legends say that they are the descendants of the sons of Rama and his followers who went west, the famous love, and he ended up coming down the coast of India, as in his descendants, through Rajasthan and Gujarat. They have a fascinating cuisine. They have fascinating customs. They're a highly educated, hard-working business community. Very intelligent. And there must be less than 5,000 or 6,000 of them. And they're mostly in Mumbai. So that's one community that we rarely talk about. One of the biggest car dealers in Bombay was from this community. And he would lend out cars, brand new cars, to community members for their weddings. So you could, have a massive 8-cylinder Buick, brand new from the showroom at Dadaji Dhakji, on your wedding day, take you around and drop you off home, and then go back to the showroom to be sold to somebody else. And they were so good at what they did that they had a massive lift in the building, a lift into which you could put a Rolls Royce. Why? Because the parking lot at Dadaji Dhakji was on the terrace. So the lift actually went through the building to the terrace, and you drove out and parked the cars on the terrace so that you'd have more cars in the showroom than otherwise. And many years later, I once catered to the family, and I used the lift as my kitchen. It was that big.
Was it still functioning?
Oh yes. So that's one community. The other community that we don't talk enough about is the Koli community. And the Kolis have always been there. They've actually given their goddesses names to so many parts of Bombay. Probably the name Mumba Devi for Mumbai, again, is a Koli goddess. Kolaba comes from Kalubai Devi. Tardeo. And Kalba Devi, again, is Kalubai Devi again. So many parts, and these Koliwadas where, they've almost been ghettoized into these tiny houses, because they're not really a people who've been into amassing wealth and fame and things like that. They've been a very happy people. But because they didn't fight so much for their rights, they've been marginalized over the years. And that's really tragic, because these are the actual sons of the soil. There are others who would claim to be sons of the soil, but these are the sons of the soil. That Bombay had such a rich history of the Agris, who ran the salt agars, the salt pans. Yeah. And basically they farmed salt. I don't know if people really realize how hard a job it is to farm salt. And it does terrible things to your body and things like that, working in the salt pans. But the salt from Bombay, as recently as the Maratha period, used to be sold all the way in Delhi and north of Delhi and in the south. Because the salt pans of Bombay at the coast, which is basically your Alibag and Dive Agar, all the agars as such. So all of them were full of salt pans, and the salt trade, we have records from the Shilahara period about the salt being controlled by the state. I mean, this is why the British had a salt collector And Mahatma Gandhi essentially called the Dandi March against this, control of salt, which was such an important ingredient in all our lives. So again, the agris we rarely talk about. The salt pan lands are disappearing because the waters of Bombay are polluted and land in Bombay is a premium. So instead of having a salt pan which gives you a few lakhs a year, you sell that property and make hundreds of crores. So the salt pan lands are being converted, the mangroves are disappearing, and the livelihood of the coolies and the agris is vanishing. And this is sad once again. There was an amazing community made up of smaller communities of Jews. So there were Baghdadi Jews, there were certain, Jews from across India, and there were the Bene Israelis, who all built up a fascinating community of Jewry in Bombay. There are a large number of synagogues even today in the city, and most of them, not most, let's be honest, all of them go without a quorum on the Sabbath. So Shabbat does not have a quorum anywhere because they just aren't enough. No, forget about lack of priests, just not enough followers. So I think Thane is the only one which regularly has a quorum on Shabbat and proper services. Everywhere else, they look forward to European groups coming down, and when they visit the synagogue, they ask them whether they'll come on Saturday, and so that the prayers can be said properly. But that was a huge part of Mumbai. The Masjid Bandar station is actually not named after a Muslim place of worship, but after a Bene Israeli synagogue. Because in Marathi, they were all called Masjid or Masjid. And Samaji Hasaji Divekar was basically Samuel Divekar. And he was in the service of the British, captured by Tipu, ransomed, and in gratitude, he built the Gateway of Mercy, the Shar Harahim. And that's, absolutely. And this is after which, we use the term Masjid Bandar. And there are two synagogues close by. There's an Israel Mohalla even today, in the heart of Masjid Bandar. And again, this community we don't know about. One of the most active, suburbs of Bombay was Mazgaon. And today in Mazgaon, most of the weddings that are done on this beautiful school ground. And this school was set up by a Jewish gentleman called Sir Eli Kaduri. And the Eli Kaduri school has more Islamic weddings than anything else. So, this is the kind of harmony that existed in Bombay. Mazgaon had 2 pacifier temples. It had half a dozen mosques, half a dozen churches, half a dozen temples. And everybody lived very, very happily together. So, that was the city, and all of these communities we are losing out on, we are missing out on. And when we forget them, we lose a vital piece of our past,
Fortunately, sir, when I'm doing my own independent research and traveling around, I've discovered that the younger generations of coolies, they have started reasserting themselves, their cultural identity. And I feel that there's this citywide movement where coolie youths from different Koliwadas, they have, I think, formed some union of their own. And they are putting forth their cases and fighting against government, against anything that they see encroaching on their turf and identity. So that's a good thing.
Yes, and you see what they've done is they've banded together to create a vote bank. Yes. And there is nothing that makes a political more amenable than a vote bank. So when there's a sizable number of people who are going to vote together, and who will vote against you if you don't take care of them, then automatically you will take care of them. So the smaller communities, you see, they have the problem of disappearing because they are not a vote bank. The coolies have been smart enough that before they are completely dissipated, while they still live in their Koliwadas, that they use them as a bargaining chip. Yes. And I see no reason why not. And I'm so happy to see this resurgence, and this pride in their Koli identity, which they had been made to feel like they were inferior. They worked with fish, you wrinkle your nose and they go out on small boats, they drink a lot of alcohol. So all these stereotypes. And they'd been kind of repressed in many ways because of the kind of treatment that was going on. And thanks to at least the official government line that everybody is equal, and that distinguishing between people on caste lines is a crime, the coolies have finally begun to establish their own identity. The agris, on the other hand, sadly, no longer live in agri padas. The Gautha, just Agri Pada, I mean, you can't get more Agri than that. And today they have dispersed. So they don't have the same clout that the Kohlis have managed to achieve. And I hope that the Agris also do it. How often do you even hear of the Bhandaris of Bombay, Anurag?
Bhandaris are the least mentioned, I must say. But yeah.
And they were the policemen of Bombay.
Exactly, the first Bhandari militia.
Yeah. And today we don't even know the word Bhandari. They had a unique cuisine which has completely disappeared. There is no representation. At least the Agri and the Kohli food can be eaten. The Bhandari food, I mean, you'd be hard pressed to find a place. And Bhandari families today make Kohli Agri food. So, you know, sometimes the losses are irreplaceable.
That's true, sir. And so we discussed the communities that were being marginalized or ignored as such. And could you think of any individual who has contributed greatly, but it's still unfortunately not in the mainstream when discussing the city's history?
So there are many people, and it depends on how you look at it. The Irani Zoroastrians who came in the 19th century came thanks to one man called Manikji Rimji Hataria. I mean, that's the central figure. There was a lot of organizations, etc., that backed him. We don't talk about him. There were a large number of very, very important people who were in many ways the shapers of the city. And at one time, more than 1/3 of the city was owned by Parsis, as in physically owned by them. The houses rented by the Europeans were all owned by the Parsis because nobody wanted to build, buy and establish a house for a 2 or 3 year period that you were here on duty. They had a large number of very important people who helped build the city and the city's infrastructure. We don't talk about them. The Parsi Patels of Bombay, who were responsible for not just the police force of Bombay, but who were responsible for the negotiations with the Marathas, the Sindhis, etc., in ensuring that peace prevailed in Bombay and Bombay could work. We don't talk about great shipbuilders, the Wadia master builders who came down and virtually built the Mazgaon docks. The only floating British man o' war today is floating in Portsmouth Harbour because it was built in Bombay by the Wadia shipbuilders. And most people in Bombay don't know about it.
There's also this famous legend of the American Declaration being signed on a ship made in Bombay.
So the American national anthem was written by Francis Scott Key when he was locked up on the HMS Minden, which was again built by the Wadias in Bombay Harbour. And one would think that Bombay would, take these pieces of its past and be proud of them and have monuments to them, but they don't. I mean, we don't even hear of the Wadia master builders. The Mazgaon docks could have easily been named after them, but it's not to be. I mean, that is what is. There was a lot of Wadias who started building ships for themselves as the family grew and bifurcated. And they said, if this is the trade that is making the British rich, why don't we have a piece of the action? So there's a crazy old man who's one of my ancestors called Ardeshir Wadia. And he became the uncrowned king of Bombay as far as money was concerned in business. He had a majlis. People would come to sit in his majlis and just be recognized that, Arey, we haven't seen you in so many days. What's happening? Dhanda, not good. And, Vishesh Tippani was done and there were all kinds of discussions and hints and tips on business. And Ardeshir Wadia couldn't stand how congested Bombay was. And I'm talking about back then. So he moved out of Bombay. And he moved out of Bombay into sylvan surroundings of fields and trees. And he built a small palace for himself of red brick. So the locals called it Lal Bagh. And it's been slightly controversial. We have a station renamed Lal Bagh. And I keep wondering and thinking, how many people know that Lal Bagh was actually a Parsi building and there's no trace of it any longer today, and of Ardeshir Wadia, the man that built it. The man that donated the entire plot on which the JJ hospital is built was the same man. I mean, we know about Sir Jamshedji Jijibai and there are many monuments to him, but what about the man who gave JJ the property to build the hospital, the man who built Lal Bagh? And so there are many heroes like this, and I'm talking just about the Parsis because of the continuity of thought. But Similarly, there have been many heroes from many different communities, and they've never really had their day in the sun.
So continuing with this thread, sir, so as we discussed, a lot of cultural give and take that happens in this city with different communities, and over the centuries it has led to exchanges of cultural and religious ideas basically, one community shaping other and vice versa. So could you share one particular example that strikes to you in terms of these
See,
cultural
I'll
exchanges?
spread it around instead of a single example. Uh, I come from the Parsi community. If you look at the Parsi wedding rituals, they're nothing like Zoroastrian rituals on the run up to the wedding. The wedding ceremony might be a very Zoroastrian ceremony, but all the rituals running up to it are basically socio-religious phenomena. We do things that we've adopted from Gujaratis and which are now part and parcel of our cultural fabric. We can't think of doing a Parsi wedding without them. This planting of a mango tree. I mean, where do you have mango trees in Persia? And this putting in of panchadhatu or ashtadhatu or whatever you'd like, wrapping cloth around it, the use of turmeric, the use of vermilion. These are not fundamentally Zoroastrian things, but they've become part of the Zoroastrians. The fact that so many religious places belonging to different communities are seeing through the years worshippers of various other communities. Right. So I give you one example from the Parsi community first. The Parsis have this famous Bikaberam's well, which is next to the old CTO, which was virtually on the sea at one time before Churchgate was reclaimed and all of that area. And that has been a place of veneration for people across the board. And this is at least such a large monument. There are small wells in Bombay. There's one opposite Grant Road Station West, and you will see people of all communities paying their obeisance to this one water well where there'll be a little lamp burning and a small straggly, bunch of flowers hung up over there. Because the sense of belief, the sense of faith is there. You will see so many non-Christians doing the novena at the Mahim Church of St. Michael's. And you'll wonder, as to, are they all Christians? And you're like, no, there are Muslims in this, there are Parsis in this, there are Jews in this, you name it.
The same for Dargahs.
Yeah, same for Dargahs. What about your Matmauli? Exactly. Haji Ali Dargah. I mean, there will be more non-Muslims at any given time at the Haji Ali Dargah than there will be.
Even Mahim.
Yeah, Mahim Dargah, same thing. So, these cross-cultural boundaries have been wiped out a long time ago. And it's only recently that they've been kind of being re-erected, these fences. Mumbai didn't have these problems. You could very easily wave across these boundaries. I mean, the cult of Sai Baba is probably such a huge cult in Bombay. And it is pan-religion, and I see a lot of appropriation of Sai Baba as a Hindu saint, as a Hindu prophet. And I smile at it and think about, all the crazy Sai Baba temples that I've seen spring up and the kind of devotees I've seen in lines, and they've had nothing to do with being Hindu or not. A man who said, Sabka Malik Ek. So that is, to a large extent, the community ethos of Mumbai.
So you have talked a lot about communities reinventing or repurposing their myths basically. So can you share a relevant example that you can think of now, community reinventing their original myths or any myths for that matter?
So, I'll give you a reverse example actually, of a community's myth actually being fact. So, for years and years, historians looked down their noses at the Pathare Prabhus, who believed that they had, this mythical king called Bimba Raja, who brought them down. And there were always rumors that Bimba was the person who gave Bombay its name. And they quoted a text called the Mahikavati Chi Bakhar, also called the Bimba Khyan, the story of Bimba. And he had this mythical capital city called Mahikavati, which they said was Mahim. And a large number of historians and linguists said that that cannot be. Mahikavati cannot turn into Mahim, that the Apabhransha is not possible. All was fair and all was fine, and it was considered a semi-historical, quasi-historical document. And then in 2015-16, we discovered a broken inscription of a very interesting king who ruled Bombay at one time called Hambir Rao. Maharaja Hambir Rao, who ruled the Konkan, or what in those days was called the Thane Konkan, or the Kukan Thane, which was from, North Konkan down all the way to, near where Janjira is. And so borders of Raigad and Thane district, and now Palghar also. So that area of the coast, all the way till the hills, but not over, was called Konkan Thane. We have Marco Polo referring to it, and Ibn Battuta referring to it, etc., by the same names. So Hambir Rao talks about being a vassal, first of all, of Firozshah Tughlaq, which firmly establishes Tughlaq dominion over Bombay, even if it's indirectly, which we were never sure about, and then goes on to say that he is ruling Thane Konkan from his capital city, Mahim Bimbas Thane, Mahim, the city of Bimba. And for the first time, Bimba actually is a historical entity carved. I mean, this is graven in stone. You can't get more historical than this, right? And this is a 14th century document. And the Pathare Prabhus have always said that in the 12th, 13th century AD, they were in this migration, and at the end of the 14th century, they ended up here. Sorry, the 13th century, they ended up here. So this suddenly says that they were right. There was a king called Bimba, and he did rule at Mahim. Oops, it's no longer a myth. It's now historical fact. So, there is always stuff that can surprise you. And the way these things can come around and bite you in the backside. So I keep telling people who do history and community history that never think that you have closed the chapter. There is always scope for more. You never know when data pops up. I mean, who expected a broken stele to come out of BARC like this? And it did. So there are so many such things. Why was this king a one dynasty king? Why don't we know about his ancestors? Why does he never mention his antecedents? And then you realize that there is the Hambir Rao that is actually mentioned in the Mahikavati Chibakar. Yeah. And then you start wondering whether he is the same Hambir Rao, and whether he is the one who inherits the Thane Konkan from the Bimba Rajas. And then this sets you on a completely different track. And then you start asking yourself if Bimba's Thane could have become Bombay. And then
Never discard community narratives.
Yes, so oral traditions and community narratives have powerful truths in them. Sometimes it's not possible for us to track these truths down immediately, but don't disregard them. Keep them on the slow burner. You never know when you need to bring them to the fore.
So people have been constantly adopting new cultural practices and phenomena that did not exist before. So it is something that is contemporary and it's constantly going on, I guess. And the visual research team for this project has recently discovered women distributing the communion in church, which I think never traditionally existed in the Catholic community. So can you think of any more examples that might be around the city and that needs further research to document these phenomena?
There was a lot more gender parity, I would say, let's not call it equality, in the past. And a lot of it is now for purely practical reasons, quietly rearing its head upwards. We are realizing that when we exclude in a very chauvinistic manner half the community, we cut down on our workforce, we cut down on our strengths, and we become weaker actually. There are so many cases where communities have woken up and realized that they cannot marginalize their women. Take the example of the Bori community. The Bori Muslims have always been called progressive Muslims. When we talk about the Boris, we sometimes forget the Konkani Muslims, who are a completely different flavor, as I like to call it, of Islam on the coast. Traders on the coast who came in from across the seas, settled down here, married into the local communities and became part of the community. Konkani Muslims spoke Marathi, wore Marathi dress. Some of this is sadly changing now because of identity crisis.
They have Maharashtrian surnames as well.
They have Maharashtrian surnames and they follow the same norm of Maharashtrian surnames.
Exactly.
Belonging to a certain village.
Yeah.
So and so Kar.
Kar, yeah.
And
interestingly, many of them have Maratha surnames.
Very, very Maratha surnames. So sometimes they have very Brahmin surnames.
That's true. I've actually heard just that the topic is now being discussed. I clearly remember this one Konkani Muslim gentleman whom I met in a local who was speaking Marathi in a very Konkani Brahman accent through the nasal thing. And I was surprised, like
because they speak
Oh my
Konkani at
God.
home.
Yeah.
You know, so
It's a very Brahmini Marathi.
hardcore linguists will tell you that they don't speak Marathi, they speak Konkani, and that they also speak Marathi. So I still remember when I was excavating at the side of Mandad, and we wanted to take permission to excavate on an empty plot of land, and we promised that we would fill up the trench and go. It was a small soundage that we took over there. And when we were led to the person's house, his name was Dandekar, because he lived on the Danda. You know, so Dandekar is a Tambat surname, Dandekar is a Konkani Muslim surname, Dandekar is a Brahmin surname. You know, the great Dandekar, who was a historian and linguist. So these are some of the very interesting things. Now, the Konkani Muslim women were all always educated and ran the businesses of their husbands and their fathers, because the husbands and fathers were traders who were most of the time not at home. So if the women were not educated, they would not be able to run family, house and everything. And they did in an equal capacity. The Koli women, the men would fish and bring the fish back, and then the women would take the fish to the market. The wealth of the Koli families was worn around the necks of the Koli women. You know, the Boris, very similarly, Bori women would be educated and would sit in the family businesses, mind in the family business. So there's somebody keeping an eye on cash transactions. So when you have multiple small transactions during the day, you want somebody you can trust. And who can you trust more than the people of your family? So if the men folk are out doing business, the women folk are running the business end of things over here. And all over you will find that the communities that do well are A, business communities, and B, communities that educate their women, because they automatically end up educating their children better, because the mothers at home have a far better grasp on education, having been themselves educated, and want all their children to be educated. So in the Christian church, this is what has been happening. We have now smaller nuclear families. Populations of all highly educated communities are shrinking, because again they are seeing the writing on the wall of not being able to have large families and fend for them, because it's horribly expensive. So you have no choice but to bring the women folk into the circle. Now, I come from a community that's incredibly chauvinistic when it comes to religion. Zoroastrian priests have to be men. But what we are seeing as a phenomenon across the seas now in Iran is that Zoroastrian women are being brought into the priesthood. And this has created all kinds of mayhem back in India as to, Ata mi kai karu. And this is what change is all about. And this kind of change is continuously being driven, Anurag. And in 1896 or 97, we had the first literacy survey in India. And women's literacy in India was 2%, pan-India. Now, I don't want to go into the accuracy of the survey or whatever, but imagine from 2% to where we've come today. Do we have 100% literacy? No. Do we have even 90% women's literacy? No. But we've come a long way. And we've realized that the more educated women that they are, the better it is for family, the better it is for community. So women are now standing out and doing their bit.
So now coming to food, you being a very reputed culinary anthropologist and studying the culinary traditions of the city, do you think that there are culinary traditions of certain communities which are underrepresented in the larger narrative? And the other question would be, how do you think the eating patterns have changed over the years?
Ooh, so we better have 2 or 3 hours for this, Anurag. But to put it in a nutshell, there are so many communities whose food is not accessible. Like, we were talking a little while back. Where do you go if you want to eat a Bhandari meal?
Cuisine, yeah.
Where do you go if you want to eat a Bori meal? I mean, people will say Bori Mohalla, but the Mohalla does not serve Bori food. Because traditionally, the people making food apart from mithai were non-Bori Muslims who were making their cuisines and not the cuisine of the houses of the Bori families.
Right.
So there is no Bori restaurant, and it's always surprised me as to why there hasn't been an enterprise in Bori.
This is just one gentleman, I guess, Munaf. Right?
So Munaf does things as the Bori kitchen, but there are other caterers also. But there is no restaurant space as such,
that's true.
where you can go and eat traditional Bori meals. And it's surprising, for such a big community. So when I first started thinking about this, I realized, where do you go for a khoja meal? Same problem, unless there's a home chef that you go to, you can't get a khoja meal in Bombay. So a lot of the smaller Islamic communities that make up the fabric of Bombay don't get recognized in the culinary landscape. To make matters more difficult, the Jews of Bombay are now such small numbers that it's almost impossible to get a Jewish meal. I remember my student Leora Pezarkar, who is a Bene Israeli Jew, was talking to me about putting together a cookbook, because she started studying the traditions, the culinary traditions of the Bene Israeli. And I asked her, I said, where do I go for a meal? And she said, I'll invite you home, sir. And I had one of the most beautiful meals with her family in Thane. The point I'm trying to make here is that what if I want to eat or take somebody out to eat a Bene Israeli meal? Where do we go? We can't. There is nobody. We recently had a heritage walk in Bombay with a very renowned with a very renowned Jewish scholar. I can't remember his name just now. And we had to find somebody in a synagogue who would on order make a few things for us. Very specifically, because that lady is the last person, it seems, who caters to events in the community, but doesn't cater outside as such. Because there's the need, the community has a need, and therefore she does. So there are people, it's not like they aren't there. But unlike Singapore, where you have hawker centers and spaces are given out to various communities to bring up a multi-community eating experience, we don't have anything like that in India or in Bombay. Imagine in Bombay a place where you could go and get 20 different kinds of community foods in a food court. It would be, I'm sure it would be completely mobbed on a regular basis. When we say dosa in Bombay, we mean a Udupi dosa, right? But it's not the dosa that you get in Udupi. The dosa that you get in Udupi is a soft, fluffy dosa covered in pori. Yeah. And the dosa that you get in Bombay is like a biscuit, a thin biscuit. And you wonder, so it's taken its own cultural transformation. There are a large number of Saraswats who are responsible for these eateries. And it's created a subgenre of its cuisine. So the real Udupi cuisine is not seen in Bombay.
It's like the Chinese cuisine in India.
Absolutely. The next thing I was coming to, look at how popular momos have got. Chicken momos are now everywhere. Every 4 streets or 5 streets there's a chicken momo guy. Who would have thunk even 20 years ago that momos would have become so popular in Bombay? But you could see that in Delhi. And you could see that in Calcutta, that when momos started coming up, they became so popular that more and more people would set up shops. Now, a lot of the original momo shops were pork momos. There are problems with serving pork and with serving beef. So you don't have red meat momos any longer. So most of the momos are chicken or the vegetarian, but it's not that veg momos don't happen. I have a close friend of mine who is a Tibetan Nepalese lady, and she tells me that vegetarian momos are very, very much part and parcel of the tradition of making momos back at home. And mutton momos. She makes the most exquisite mutton momos. I mean, I thought I could never eat something better than a pork momo, but mutton momos are even more delicious. So the whole thing here that it's hot, it's steaming, it's got the whole healthy tag because it's steamed and not fried. Most of our on the street food is fried. So this is steamed. So it ticks off the healthy thing. And it's hot, it's delicious, it's umami, it comes with a spicy chutney. You can't go wrong with it. So a lot of people have started setting up stalls all over the place. In fact, most momo makers, I don't know a single Tibetan momo maker anywhere out of Calcutta, outside Calcutta. They are all non-Tibetans. And I now know momo makers from Bangalore and momo makers from Madras. So this is what's telling how the phenomenon, once it spreads. Indo-Chinese food or Sino-Indian, Sino-Panju food as people like to call it. Nobody in China has ever eaten veg Manchurian balls. The Manchurian gravy was developed in Bombay. The Manchus would have stabbed themselves with a blunt toothpick and committed suicide if they'd seen this thing called Manchurian. Right? Then we have a dish called Szechuan. The people of the Szechuan province, they're wondering what the hell it is. Not a single Szechuan peppercorn has been harmed in the making of Szechuan cuisine and making of Szechuan sauce. So, but that's the phenomenon. I remember one of my colleagues talking to me about the biggest manufacturer of Chinese cooking sauces, the famous green, yellow, and red chili sauces that are used by all the hand carts and the hotels. And was told, the traditional sauces are thick sauces. So these in India are thickened using mashed potatoes. So 50% of every bottle of hot sauce is actually mashed potato slurry with vinegar, salt, and then the chilies.
Interesting.
So yeah, that's the way it works. And all kinds of amazing things happen. I was at Ling's Pavilion yesterday, and I remember Baba Ling telling me that he gets his best mushrooms from the northeast and not from China, because the same kind of mushrooms, the same varieties grow in the northeast, and he's got a supplier. They come in dried, he soaks them overnight, and the next day they're in his food and they're amazing. So, when you make an effort and you go out to see the food of Bombay, you see this amazing food that exists. I still remember the first time I ate a Chinese dosa. I was in Villepale, this must have been 35 years ago, and I said, "What?" He said, sir, Chinese dosa. So there was Maggi noodles made on the side and kept.
As you said.
Yeah, and he made a dosa, he put a pile of noodles, boiled vegetables, Szechuan sauce, soy sauce, chili sauce, whipped it up and then rolled up his dosa and served it to us. And guess what? It was pretty damn good. So you have Chinese patties, you have Chinese samosa, and you have Chinese bhel. None of it available in China.
Exactly.
It's like, everywhere the Chinese has gone, this has happened. American chop suey. No Chinaman has ever eaten it.
Or orange chicken for that matter.
Orange chicken, General Tso's chicken.
General Tso's chicken, absolutely.
Yeah. So all of these things. And that's the amazing thing about food, no? How it adapts. And how it adapts. I look at biryanis and I see biryanis pan-India and everybody gets all huffy about this is the original biryani. And that's not the original biryani. And what was army food? Meat and rice cooked together and put on a dig and kept hot till on a bullock cart till the army stopped to eat, has now become one of the most celebrated foods for celebrations all over India.
So many tales of origin associated with it. The Nawab building a wall daily, breaking it down and whatnot.
So because it's the story that sells, Anurag, at the end of the day.
Absolutely.
I remember this beautiful story of one of the Nawabs of Oudh, who had various khansamas in his kitchen who made different things. And he had this khansama who came over and said, I would like to be employed by you. And so he said, what do you make? So he said, dal. So I was like, dal? You make dal, you specialize in making dal. So how many types of dal do you make? One. It's like, you make just one type of dal and you want me to hire you. I mean, dal at the end of the day. He says, you eat that dal, then you decide to hire me or not. So the Nawab is quite intrigued. So, this man's confidence that he's selling just one kind of dal. And the guy says, look, there's a rule, but you tell me what time you're going to eat and you have to be there at that time because the dal has to be cooked and eaten the moment it is cooked. So they make a deal as to what time His Highness will come down to eat, and the Khansama goes out to the kitchen, whips up this dal, arrives with the dal. Now the Begum has heard of this and is appalled that there is a mere Khansama who's not even in their service who's dictating when the Nawab will eat. So she waylays him and talks to him and wastes his time, and he reaches the dining hall 15 minutes late. After waiting for 10 minutes, the Khansama turns to the nearest potted plant, pours the dal into it and leaves. And the Nawab reaches there to find out that his dal has been thrown away. And there is no trace of that Khansama at all. And the legend goes that it was a rose plant. And the next day, this rose bud blossomed and the entire palace was filled with the smell of the most delicious dal ever tasted by people. And then the plant died. And all those people wondered at what they missed out on. Now,
and the Khansama was never found again.
Of course. So the story is purely apocryphal, but the fun is in the story, So it is very often the story that sells things, and similarly the narrative can be misused. I remember a lot of people getting very, very upset about the consumption of beef, and being very worried about it and that it was not right. Cow slaughter is a ban in the Indian Constitution, and is banned. It was never
Allowed,
cows that were
yeah.
being slaughtered. It was bulls and bullocks who would have a specific veterinarian's letter saying that they were no longer capable of work in the farm, which would be slaughtered. So, actual beef was eaten by the poorest of poor as a protein. Most of the people who ate beef were actually eating buffalo meat because it was far healthier and there were healthier animals that were being butchered. There was no ban on the butchery. When a blanket ban was created, 9,000 people lost their jobs in Mumbai because people were parading around saying, we have saved the cow. The cow was always safe. You see, there was absolutely no problem about the cow being safe.
And along with the poor losing access to nutrition.
Yeah, and the lack of nutrition to the poorest of the poor. I remember this beautiful restaurant opposite the JJ hospital, which had like 12 things on its menu, and 11 of those were beef
I know
dishes.
this place, yes sir.
And one was dal chawal. And it basically fed the relatives of very poor people who came
Patients,
from all
yeah.
over India
Exactly.
to JJ hospital. And they closed down because those people who came to the restaurant could not pay for mutton or chicken. And what else was the poor guy going to make? Sell just dal chawal. So a lot of livelihoods got this thing impinged upon, and then the system corrected itself and so on and so forth. But what about the damage that it did? So the narrative can be used and misused. Whereas it can be a very happy narrative and tell you happy stories and bring you together. It can also be a very twisted narrative and do damage which is unnecessary to the community, because once you break an egg, you can only decide ये half fry होएगा या omelette होएगा या भुर्जी होएगा. There's no going back into the egg.
Exactly.
And that is why there is an enormous sense of responsibility we must have about food, Anurag, which should, according to me, be eat and let eat.
And regarding the eating habits, I remember you mentioning previously that coolies in Mumbai have recently started eating octopuses, which they never did. So could you speak some more on that?
So one very fascinating thing that was observed by maritime researchers was that up and down both the coasts of India, nobody consumed octopus. Octopus would sometimes come into the nets and stuck with it. So it was discarded or thrown into these bins of animal food material that are kept in docks and which are taken away and which are pulverized beyond this thing and turned into animal food. It was very good. Why not? Good protein for dog, cat food, etc. A couple of young chefs, having studied in India and then having worked abroad, came back and put octopus on the menu. And octopus suddenly became a commodity that sold for a good amount of money, because these people wanted the best possible octopus available to them. And purveyors of fish suddenly started putting octopus on their lists. And the fisher folk were like, this? Rubbish? Kachara? I mean, people are going to pay me money for this. And it was like, hallelujah. I mean, who doesn't want to make money, right? And if I can give you my kachara and make money out of it, I'm happy about it. So now I will treat my octopus carefully when I catch it. I will not throw it in the bottom of my hold. I'll put it on ice properly because I will get money for it. And I remember talking to Mrs. Tapke from Warsaw, Kolivada, and talking about this phenomena. And she says, we were also very intrigued. So we also decided to find out, what is this whole thing about
How does it
octopus
taste?
eating it? So said, we bought it, chopped it up fine. And he said, we eat it regularly, she said. We boil it and then we make a beautiful masala. We use meat masala and we cook it just like keema. And yeah, it's damn tasty. So just thinking as to how, things can come from outside and influence things inside. And this is now a viable source of protein which was being wasted, which is suddenly becoming more and more mainstream. It reminds me of this beautiful story of lobsters. So in Maine, lobsters were called bugs. They were crushed and used to make manure by the local Indian tribes. They were fed to the poorest of the poor. They were fed in jails. There were riots in jails for refusing to eat lobster. Ki kitna lobster khayega? And then when the Trans-American Railroad started and something had to be shipped out to be sold there, they started putting lobster on the menus of these fancy cars. And these were people away from the coast who were now eating lobster. And it's very, very interesting, a nice thing to eat. And well tagged, as a pricey product. And soon lobster became more and more in demand. And from being a poor man's food, which was, being fought against, it suddenly became so much in demand that you could not meet the demand, and it became more and more and more expensive. The poorest of the poor in New York ate oysters, and they would hide their oyster shells behind the house so that people wouldn't realize how poor they were. They would not throw them in the kachra, because then say, "Arey, kitne garib log hai, roz oyster kha rahe." Can you imagine people eating oysters and being garib every day? So, when these trends change, sometimes they can go the absolute opposite direction. But that's the way food is.
Absolutely. So, since you're discussing food history in general and culinary traditions, so can you think of any food traditions or recipes that have been lost forever? Some food items that could not stand the test of time?
Oof. My favorite recipe that I've only heard of, and this is not even something that is not being made but we have a record of somewhere, is this Bhandari dish. The Bhandaris did something very similar with raw alcohol, where they would apply masala on the fish and then leave the fish for 24 hours to marinate in alcohol and let the alcohol do the partial cooking. It's called a ceviche. Okay? And it's very, very popular in the Mediterranean and in South America, etc.
Peru especially.
Peru especially. So it's a great breakfast food and so on and so forth. Tomatoes, lime and all kinds of fresh seafood are mixed together with celery and a few other things. So this kind of a dish sounds fascinating to me, where raw distilled warm alcohol would be poured on top of this marinated masala fish and left to sit and then eaten the next day. I can't find a single Bhandari who seems to know how to make this. I have met at least 4 different Bhandaris who say, "Oh yes, I've eaten this as a child. Oh yeah, my grandfather told me about this." But never once has anybody said, "I know how to make this." So there are many dishes like this, The Parsis used to make a very famous dish called an ubaryu. So the Parsi ubaryu was basically like, to make it very simple, it was like an undia cooked in a clay pot with a chicken and meatballs.
So it's like the pork tea that people
very
make
much
in
like the
Thane,
pork tea.
Palghar.
And you do get a chicken ubaryu in Gujarat also, amongst other communities. So this would be cooked in a pot which would be capped with a small vati, turned upside down, wedged between a couple of stones, and you would make this mound of 3-day-old mango leaves. And I mean a little mountain. And there would be 3-day leaves and mango leaves. And you can't use 2-day-old ones because they're too wet, and 4-day are too dry. So when you light it up, it goes up like a, cataclysm. The way the heat is intense. So basically this thing acts like a pressure cooker inside. And this intense heat from the outside just creates a pressure which can't escape and cooks everything. Then by the time it cools down, everything is ready to be cooked. It's very dramatic. You bring it to the table, you crack open the pot breaks open and everybody eats from inside it. And there'll be all the winter veggies along with a small chicken and meatballs and a green masala. Can you imagine doing that in Bombay? On your terrace, dig a hole in the ground, put a pot. You can't do it.
You can't find mango leaves to begin with.
Where do you get 3-day-old mango leaves?
Exactly.
And even if you did, you would be cutting on a mango tree, half of it to get it. And the next thing you know, the BMC or the PMC will be fining you and, taking you to jail for that. So you can't make these things any longer. So we know the recipes, we know how to make them, but they can't be done. I remember working with the Lost Recipes team on Epic Channel, and one of the recipes we worked with was with the family in Udwada, where there are rural kitchens, and there was this beautiful full fish that was marinated, then wrapped in an old muslin sadra, and covered in clay, so that the clay would seal it in, and then baked. And then you kind of crack open the outside, tear the muslin, and get at the fish, which is steamed in its own juices and its own steam.
Got it.
Delicious. But where do I go baking a whole fish in Bombay? No bakery is going to say, yeah, please use my bakery. Bake your fish. No, where do I dig up clay in Bombay? Half the time I'd be horrified at the soil in Bombay if I had to wrap my fish in it. Nobody would want to eat it. So, you win some, you lose some. When I was growing up, my grandmother's friend firmly believed that I was sickly and dying. So I had paratyphoid as a child. 15 years later, she still believed I was sickly and dying. So every year in winter, she would send me something called badam pak and Ida Pak. Then at some point the Ida Pak stopped coming and only the Badam Pak would come. So this is basically steamed almonds which are crushed with meva and sugar, okay, and made into a fudge. And this is healthy because it's winter in Bombay, you know, and the cold winter you need it. I'm like looking around and say, okay, I love the stuff. I'm not arguing with you. So the Ida Pak, I remember my mother writing a recipe book and talking about her great grandmother's recipe for this dish, which is basically an egg mithai. So the recipe starts by saying, take 50 egg yolks. And they're just thinking already. You ask people in Bombay to take 50 egg yolks, they'll talk about the cholesterol.
True.
Of course, the wags will say, what do you do with 50 egg whites? And when she released the book, true to form, there was a Parsi who said, but madam, what do you do with the 50 egg whites? And my mother, cool as a cucumber, turned and said, make meringue. I mean, what else would you do? And he poor guy said, and sat down. So, you know, imagine cooking down eggs with mawa and sugar and ghee into this beautiful barfi. Because it's cold in winter and you need to develop strength, you need heat. So these are things that nobody makes any longer because, let's face it, we don't need to eat that and we can very well do without strength in winter in Bombay.
Since we are talking about Mumbai's cultural heritage, in your view, basically in your perspective, which aspect of Mumbai's cultural heritage, if the situation arises, deserves a GI tag?
Oof. I think that I'm biased. Number one, I think that most definitely the community foods of Bombay should, as a grouping with subgroups within it, have a GI tag. I also think that, you know, things like the East Indian bottle masala, which have such a lovely story and are so unique, you know, and why don't we have more of it? Why doesn't it have a GI tag? Koli masala.
Koli masala, I was about to get this, yes.
Then Goda masala. And Goda masala categorized by community. I mean, it doesn't have to be uniform. So, things like this. You know, there is a great legend that the greatest watermelons in India grew in Bandra. And that they were cursed never to grow again. Otherwise, I would have asked you to get a GI tag for them. But so many of the things that we eat in Bombay, for example, the Mahim Halwa. I mean, Mahim Halwa is such a Bombay thing. But do we have a GI tag for it? No, we don't. Which is sad, no?
So could you please share the Bandra melon story, the watermelons of Bandra? It's very interesting.
So the legend goes that the greatest watermelons of all time were grown in Bandra. And that when the watermelon crop was getting ready, the men would spend their entire day and night protecting the watermelons. And they would not even go to church.
Missing the prayers.
So they'd miss their Sunday prayers and things like that. And the old padre that was there at, you know, St. Andrews was, chalta hai, okay, happens. And then he died and a new padre came in. And for those who don't know, the church is older than the Taj Mahal.
Yeah.
And I'm talking about the Taj Mahal, not hotel, but the Taj Mahal in Agra. And the new priest was a firebrand priest, was very upset that his flock was not coming to church. And he was like, look guys, this is not good, please come to church. So I said, yes. Didn't come to church. Then he was like, look guys, this is not right at all, you're really pissing me off, come to church. Yes, and they still didn't come. So the third Sunday, it seems, he said, look, don't force me into this. If on the fourth Sunday of this month you all are not in church, I will have to take recourse to my own means. No, we all definitely coming and nobody came. So the new padre cursed the watermelons of Bandra. And watermelons stopped growing in Bandra from that day onwards. And you can ask anybody in Bandra whether they've eaten watermelons from Bandra and they'll tell you no.
Such a sweet story.
It's a lovely story. Bittersweet.
Bittersweet, absolutely. Sure, and finally, I would like to ask you, if we talk about the innovations that are going on, so what do you think is truly something that Mumbai invented?
Mumbai invented the spirit of making money with multiple communities. Mumbai is not the economic hub of India for nothing. So Mumbai learned how various different communities can be like a set of gears, which power up the economy further and further and further. So every single community contributed to the economic development of Mumbai. No single community can be said to have come here and done nothing. Every single community in Mumbai, and these communities did not live in isolation. So these communities were entrenched with each other, buying, selling, producing, manufacturing. And this is what the ethos of Bombay really is. Absolutely, like a beautiful clock, fully oiled, like a good Swiss precision, Favre Luba, or whatever you want to call it. And yeah, that's what Mumbai was all about. This is why Mumbaikars are so incredibly proud of where they come from. That's why they're usually a success wherever they go. Because they have the spirit of how to get the job done.
So thanks a lot for this very beautiful conversation covering city's history in multiple aspects. Thank you.
Absolute and total pleasure. Thank you very much, Anurag. I loved doing this. Thank you, Gio.